Thanks for staying with us. So, why is Nigeria poor? Why is it so difficult for us to produce or to save the kind of money we need for proper development? We have with us a special guest who will be breaking it down. He's a survey analyst, helping us understand why Nigeria is poor. His name is Oseghale. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. I've watched a video of you recently on the TV station where you expressed your thoughts that we're not a producing state, that we're depleting our resources. And in the next few years or next decade or so, that we're likely to be, maybe, I don't want to use the bad words, that Nigeria is likely to be a very poor state because we're actually not producing anything at all. I'm going to take you, I'd like you to start from the beginning of this. Where did this theory come about and how did it come about? And what brought us to this point and how can we fix it?
First of all, thank you for having me on the program. I'm just going to go direct to what you've asked. Earlier this year, was it late last year or earlier this year, Bill Gates said something that by 2040, Nigeria and the DRC will account for 40% of the total population living in extreme poverty by 2040, right? So that got me concerned, and I had to do the calculations, and I found out that he was right. Going by the World Poverty Clock, right, that calculates people falling into poverty in real time, I did the calculations, followed it, and then followed what the World Bank, the way the World Bank says we should create wealth. Now, what we're doing is the direct opposite of that. Now, if you look, right, between now and 2040, because everybody has been saying, oh, President Buhari created extreme poverty. The truth is this: extreme poverty or poverty has been increasing in Nigeria since the 80s. And nobody has actually, focused on it because, why? I'll explain. 2.7%, we're growing at 2.7%. 2.7% of 75 million is a negligible figure. 2.7% of 100 million, negligible. 2.7% of 150 million, you start to see the figure. 2.7% of 180 million, of 200 million, it's a disaster, right? The reason why it's so prevalent, and you can see what is going on now, it's our growth rate, which is not also helping. And I'll break it down further.
What is the growth rate? Is it the economical growth or the population growth?
Growth, population growth
Okay.
rate. Now, between now and 2040 is 21 years, right? Now, if you look at it holistically, between now and 2040, we're going to have 4 presidents. Remember, the man said by 2040, we're going to account for 40%, and DRC and Nigeria will account for 40%, right? So between now and 2040, you have 4 presidents. That is, President Buhari will finish his tenure in 2023. Between 2023 and 2040 is 17 years. If everything goes right, you have 2 presidents doing 8 tenure each. And then, 8 years, that's 2 tenures each. And then the last president, the 4th president will be in his 1st year in office, right? Now, what he's telling you is that irrespective of who sits in Aso Rock,
There'll be a crisis.
No, that poverty will continue to increase. So it's not a person thing. It's a system thing,
Okay.
right? The system, Nigeria's economic model was never designed to create wealth. It was designed to impoverish the people. When you look at a system is run by processes and procedures. So when you look at those processes and procedures, it's easy for you to tell where a system is headed. Okay. And that's the prediction. You can look at Nigeria and say, Nigeria, this is where you're headed. And for him to have compared Nigeria and the DRC, there are 2 things happening. These 2 countries account for a whole lot of the mineral resources in Africa, right? So why are these 2 countries going to account for 40%?
Because certain countries are benefiting from the situation in those countries.
Yes, we will get to that.
For instance, we refine our crude outside.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But you see, in the 80s, now, why are we increasing extreme poverty? In the 80s and 90s, the World Bank found out that a lot of countries were increasing GDPs, right? And it was a good thing that GDP were growing, right? But the World Bank now also sat down to find out why these things, why the growth was happening. And their findings took them to the point that a lot of countries were actually depleting their mineral resources, turning them into liquid cash, and they were spending, right?
It wasn't economical.
So what the World Bank now did, they now went back to their drawing table and said, look, we really need to define what the wealth of countries are, right? So they did that through the research, and they came out with 4 broad categories of wealth for countries. Namely, the produced assets. Second, the human capital assets. Third, the natural assets. And the fourth, your net foreign assets. I'll break it down. Your produced assets are your infrastructures, right? Your machineries, your manufacturing, your infrastructures, power, roads, highways, seaports, airports. Those are called efficiency drivers in the economy. Then the second one, which is the human capital asset, that's you and I, right? Education, skills, innovation. Then the third one, which is your natural assets. Your natural assets are your forestry, your waterways, your gold, your diamond, your crude oil, right? Now, your gas. Now, but under the natural assets, it's subdivided into renewable and non-renewable. Now, the renewable, what is the renewable? The ones that you can replace. For instance, you have a lake, right? Now, that lake can hold maybe 80 tons of fish, right? And then everybody starts to fish, and you deplete the fish in that lake to maybe 20 tons. And government says, you know what, it is time to stop because we've depleted that asset. So what we need to do, we're going to stop fishing for about 6 months. The fishery agencies raise fingerlings, right? And then they introduce them and say, okay, you know what, nobody fishes for the next 3 months until this fish matures. So by the time those fish mature, you now have maybe the assets in that lake, the fish assets in that lake, is renewed. It has increased to maybe 100 or 120 tons, right? That means you've renewed your asset, you're richer, right? Second is your forestry. Right? Now, you keep cutting down trees. Everybody goes into the forest here with cutlass and chainsaw, and they cut down trees and blah, blah, blah. We do not understand that those trees are assets. They are valued as assets of the country. They are valued like your crude oil. They are valued like your gold, right? Mr. Salami, Mr. This, Mr. That goes into the forest, they cut down trees and they sell, right? They are depleting the assets of the country. Okay. Now, the last one, which is your net foreign assets, is your foreign reserve, your sovereign wealth fund, your loans that you borrowed, right? Foreign loans. Then your foreign direct investments, right? Those 4 broad categories. Now, what the World Bank now said is for this produced asset, your human asset, your natural asset, your net foreign asset, you need to understand how to manage them.
Okay.
Right. This thing...
So how do we bring that home now?
Good. I'll tell you. See, this thing is like the ultimate chess game. You make a move here, you got to know where to put money to cover the liabilities. And for you to understand the concept of what I'm analyzing, you need to understand the concept of the income statement and balance sheet. Now, these assets make up your balance, they make up the balance sheet of the country. Okay. Right? Now, what is your income statement? Your income statement is basically your statement of revenue and expenditure. And then...
I don't want you to talk over the heads of our viewers because it's important that we've understood those 4 categories that the World Bank used to determine those states that are poor. How does that apply to Nigeria?
Yeah, let me tell you, I was going further to explain so that people will understand. See, the balance sheet is your statement of net worth, right? That statement of net worth, these 4 broad categories of assets is what makes up the balance sheet of every country. Okay. So what the World Bank now did was that they now went further to estimate the net worth of every country. Remember, your balance sheet, your asset equals your liabilities plus shareholders' equity, where your total net worth now equals your asset minus your liabilities, right? Remember.
Our assets.
Yeah, minus your liabilities. Now, what the World Bank now came up with was that for low-income countries, produced goods made up 14% of their total assets. Human capital made up 41%, natural capital 47%, net foreign assets minus 2%. Now, for lower middle-income countries, which Nigeria is a part of, the produced capital is 25%, human capital 51%, natural capital 27% of total wealth, and then net foreign asset minus 3%. But when I now broke down, I took Nigeria out to calculate that of Nigeria, what I got was this. Produced capital is 10.3%. Human capital, 55.9%. Natural capital, 34.65%. Net foreign assets, 0.91%, which is approximately 1%, right? Remember, your balance sheet is a statement of net worth, right? Now, this is your crude oil. Your crude oil makes up a part of 35%, right, of your total wealth. Now, you drill 2.2 million barrels a day, right? Now, let's perform an experiment.